In the news this week, the pressure is on for Mark McGowan to reduce household fees as the public makes their voice heard in an exclusive news poll.
The Prime Minister's trip to the Wild West saw McGowan cozy up to Scott Morrison over major investments in WA industries. Federal Attorney General Michaelia Cash on youth unemployment and job creation, plus Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Loom and Maliva Thorne.
Good evening. As the cost of living reaches new heights, an exclusive news poll shows WAMA News viewers want to see Premier and Treasurer Mark McGowan cut household fees and charges in this year's state budget. The poll shows a staggering 85% of people want the McGowan government to cut water, electricity and household fees. 13% wants the fees to be frozen, and only 2% says the household fees are affordable and no changes are needed. Liberal leader David Honey joined me earlier to discuss if it's time to reduce the pressure on families. David, thanks for your time. 85% of people want cuts to household fees. 13% want the fees to be frozen. Only 2% thinks the charges are affordable. What's your take on the figures?
Yeah, look, thanks, Ivan, and hi to all your listeners. You know, it really reflects the stress that households are facing, financial stress households are facing in Western Australia right now. I mean, you've seen rental prices increase enormously. You've seen now this massive impact of the increase in fuel prices around the state. You've had a state Labor government that's actually increased, for example, water prices 16% over their time in government. You know, these are huge increases in costs that families are facing, and most families haven't seen any significant increase in their income. So a lot of stress in houses, and look, especially right now, those fuel price increases. There are families in Perth that are making the decision, do I have fuel for my car so I can get to work or get my kids to school, or do we buy food? I mean, these are horrible choices for families to have to make.
Do the poll results indicate that Premier and Treasurer Mark McGowan really needs to look into cutting water, electricity and household fees in the state budget? You know,
there is absolutely, certainly no excuse whatsoever for the planned increases, and most of those utility charges are going to go up another 2%. That's the plan of the government. Now, there's no excuse whatsoever for those increases, and the government should be seriously looking at whether they can reduce those charges. I mean, let's look at the reality here. Water users in metropolitan Perth actually pay around $1 billion more for their water than it costs to deliver that service. Again, if we look at Western Power, you know, the government over 2 years has taken over $500 million out of Western Power in dividends and other charges. So, you know, these services are supposed to be cost-neutral services, but what we're seeing really is, in fact, their massive taxation on households.
Finally, what's your call to the McGowan government before the state budget?
Look, I think the government needs to really look compassionately at this issue of charges. Look, someone like myself, you know, I don't like those increasing charges, but the reality is that I can deal with that and we'll get by. But I know that there are many families in Western Australia. For them, this is, as I said, this is a choice of whether you buy food or you buy fuel. You know, they're the sort of choices they're making. There needs to be a really compassionate look, especially at people who are on low fixed incomes. I mean, people on pensions, people who are doing part-time work and so on. A lot of those people, they just go from pay packet to pay packet, and they've got to make every penny count. And the government really needs to look compassionately. How do they really help those people out? Because at the moment, many families are not going to have enough money to buy crucial basic needs, or they're in fact going to have to lose their rental accommodation because they can't afford it. You know, they need help.
David Honey, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, cheers, Ivan. Thanks very much.
The fight for the country's top job is on, with Scott Morrison recently back in WA to promote his commitment to the state ahead of the federal election.
The Prime Minister has toured Perth for the first time since the state's borders reopened, pitching the Liberal Party's promises for WA. Nelson Liu reports.
Back in town on a whirlwind visit, Scott Morrison showing some love to WA. Since his last trip to the state in June last year, the Prime Minister touched down in Perth for the first time since WA's border reopened. A 4-day visit across Perth and regional WA, kicking off an election campaign vital for WA votes.
And at this election, that is the choice. The choice is who can best manage our economy going forward.
He's revealed plenty of federal government funding for the state, starting with $4.3 million for a shipbuilding facility in Henderson on Tuesday, while also committing on Wednesday $240 million to critical minerals and battery projects, with resources critical to the country's falling unemployment rate.
One of the ways you achieve that here in Western Australia is you're serious about backing in the resources industry and the mining industry here in Western Australia.
Joint state and federal government funding is also on the way for the Perth City deal, nearly $100 million set aside for Edith Cowan University's new CBD campus, and $50 million for the Swan River Bridge.
And what this does is further add to Perth as a world-class city, providing amenity, connecting different parts of the city in a really exciting way.
Followed by Kalgoorlie on the last day and a commitment to fast-track a $1.17 billion nickel mine, while adding 2 new university rural health departments. With the federal election still more than a month away, Scott Morrison has been keen to highlight his contribution to WA.
And that is because of my Western Australian team and because of the closeness of the Western Australian team of Liberals that form our government. We've achieved a lot for Western Australia.
But despite some joshing from Premier Mark McGowan,
I can't help but feel partially responsible for his absence.
Both leaders were on the same page, including on WA's pandemic border controls.
Western Australia has travelled its own path, and rightly, and the results speak for themselves.
And a strong ongoing partnership with WA if the Prime Minister wins the election. Scott Morrison's visit to Perth is just a start to get more Western Australians voting in his favour, and with the election yet to be called, we could see more of the Prime Minister out west to come. Nelson Liu, WAMN News.
And next, on Western Perspective, an interview with Federal Attorney General Michaelia Cash on her take about the Prime Minister's trip and what Western Australians can expect from the federal budget. That's coming up in 5 minutes. Meanwhile, the federal Labor MPs have expressed their views on the Prime Minister's visit. Perth MP Patrick Gorman labelled Scott Morrison's trip to Western Australia as an apology tour. He said it's too little too late for the Liberals who've only started campaigning now.
This was Scott Morrison's annual apology tour. He calls us cave people. He does nothing while Barnaby Joyce is out there calling us North Korea. He gave $1 million to Clive Palmer's court costs. And then he comes over here once a year with a bag of cash and says sorry. Sorry doesn't cut it anymore. The Liberal Party and Scott Morrison have taken Western Australia for granted, and this visit only confirmed that.
What do you think the Prime Minister needs to do to make it up to West Australian voters if he wants to regain our support?
The Prime Minister has a real problem with the truth, and he has a real problem with saying sorry. If he was genuinely sorry, he would say so. The fact that he's never apologised for backing Clive Palmer in the High Court, he's never apologised for some of Barnaby Joyce's comments, that he denied while he was here in Western Australia that he called West Australians cave people, shows he's got a problem with the truth. And he's got a problem with apologising when he makes a mistake.
What are your thoughts on the recent Women's Network logo fiasco? Do you think that it shows that the Prime Minister is out of touch with women voters?
Look, I did have a laugh when I saw that logo. I believe that the good, hard-working, independent public servants who work in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet are doing good work for the nation. I might not agree with the politics of Scott Morrison, but those apolitical public servants do an important job. And of course they need a women's network to make sure that as workers in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, they have somewhere they feel they can discuss the issues and things that are important to them. But the logo was funny. I understand that there's now a departmental investigation into it. It will, I'm sure, be changed. But look, sometimes you just got to laugh.
Minister for Domestic Violence Prevention Simone McGurk has rubbished claims that she didn't listen to experts over women's safety and well-being. During a drive-time interview on Youth Jam Radio this week, Ms McGurk commented on the Safer Pathway program and why she won't resign over the police raid of a social worker who allegedly leaked information to the press.
Mia Davies, the opposition leader, is calling for you to resign over the raid of an Aboriginal worker in your department accused of sending documents to the media. Will you resign?
No, I won't resign. And I don't know how much your listeners were following this issue, but the police were investigating the unauthorised downloading of over 2,500 documents from the Department of Communities, and some of those documents contain specific details of children in care, so children in the child protection system, and their foster care arrangements, which is highly classified and private information. The Department of Communities realised that a large amount of documents had been released from, had been removed from the department, and so did what it is required to do under the guidelines of the Public Sector Management Act, and told the Public Sector Commission and the Corruption and Crime Commission and the police.
And on the WMN Extra News Club, we continue our series on independent community journalism, this week focusing on The Voice of Africa WA, a community radio show created by local youths in Perth. The newly launched radio show aims to provide an accurate media platform for listeners, giving young people a chance to learn the essential skills of broadcasting, raising issues, reporting community news, and hosting important conversations.
Educational platform for young Africans in WA for Africans of all age, so that we can make the Australian community get to know us, that we are here to stay longer and we form part of this community.
You don't see a lot of Africans on TV. You know, this show will give us and the audience who are African an opportunity to express themselves.
You can read and watch all that plus more on the WMN Extra News Club. Subscribe to the link attached to this post and support independent local journalism.
WA's unemployment rate has risen amid a fall in joblessness nationally. The state's unemployment rate rose for a consecutive month to 4.1% in February, increasing from 3.4% in December, while the national rate fell to 4%. It is the first month since June 2021 that WA has had a higher unemployment rate than the national rate. The fall in the national rate is the lowest in August 2008, after full-time employment increased by 77,000 and unemployment fell by 19,000, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Meanwhile, WA's participation rate, which tracks proportion of people either in work or looking for a job, also increased, rising to 70%. It is the highest participation rate recorded in the state's history.
Following Senator Kimberley Kitching's sudden death, 3 Labor senators accused of bullying have responded in a joint statement. Earlier this week, allegations emerged that Senators Penny Wong, Christina Keneally and Katie Gallagher were described as mean girls by Senator Kitching. In the joint statement, the 3 senators broke their silence regarding the claims and also announced that they would attend Senator Kitching's funeral. The senators denounced the accusations, calling them hurtful statements, and that the allegations of bullying are untrue, while also describing politics as a challenging profession in which contests can be robust and interactions difficult. The joint statement also described the reason for the 3 senators' earlier silence on the issue as being born out of respect for Senator Kitching and her family.
Rugby will be back in WA with the countdown beginning to the return of State of Origin in Perth. The state is set to host Game 2 of the 3-game competition for the second time, with tickets set to go on sale this week. It was announced last year that Perth secured the game between New South Wales and Queensland. Perth became the centre of rugby league frenzy in June 2019 when Optus Stadium hosted its first ever State of Origin game in front of a sold-out capacity crowd. The event resulted in more than 11,600 out-of-state visitors spending more than $19 million and staying for more than 69,000 nights combined in the state. Tickets for the game will be released in stages, initially sold for every second row of the stadium, keeping with WA's 50% capacity rule under the WA government health restrictions. New South Wales versus Queensland. Melly, clash of the Titans. Come on, which side are you on?
I'll be going for New South Wales. So
Okay.
I know you're into soccer, Ivan.
Yes,
are you into rugby as well?
A little bit. I mean, of course, the rugby sevens, I think we all heard about that. It's very world famous. I mean, you've got Australia, you've got New Zealand, you've got Scotland, and of course, you've got the Hong Kong team. But we all know that COVID's going very strong over there, so we hope they'll get well soon, and hopefully they can host the match again. We'll recap this week's top stories again in just a moment.
Now, here's Nelson Liu with Western Perspective.
Thanks, Ivan and Melly. Hello and welcome to WP. This week, it's been 4 short days in WA for Scott Morrison, pitching to the state's voters ahead of the federal election. The Prime Minister has returned to the state, touring Perth while announcing funding for state projects and discussing WA's GST share, jobs and COVID-19. We talked with Federal Attorney General Michaelia Cash about how she saw Mr Morrison's trip out west.
Senator, thanks for joining us this week.
It's always great to be with you, Ivan.
It's been a very gruelling journey indeed, a gruelling 4 days worth of tour in Perth and regional WA for the Prime Minister. Now, you've been beside him since the beginning of the trip. What's your assessment of his journey?
Well, certainly since Western Australia has reopened its borders both to the rest of Australia and, of course, the world, it's been fantastic to have Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, touch back down in Western Australia. As Scott said at a breakfast to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I think you were at it whilst we were here, he is a long-time friend to Western Australia. He's been coming to Western Australia long before he went into politics. And he did remind people, though, and I think this is a really important reminder. This is the man who, when he was the Treasurer of Australia, he gave back to Western Australians what they so rightly deserved, and that was, of course, our fair share of the GST. When he was Treasurer, he brought the rest of Australia with him, delivered back to Western Australia that fair share of GST, and as the Prime Minister, he legislated it. He is a great friend to Western Australia.
But speaking of being great friend to Western Australia, the comments that were made during the borders were shut, calling us cave people, on Clive Palmer, the legal issues. Why should West Australians believe that Mr Morrison is a friend of West Australia?
You look at what we have delivered for Western Australia. The recent announcement that he made, $4.3 billion in a dry dock in Henderson. That is great news for Western Australians, in particular when it comes to jobs. That'll create around 500 jobs in the construction and then around 2,000 jobs ongoing. The Perth City deal, yesterday, working with Premier McGowan, because it's a cooperative and collaborative relationship that the federal government, led by Scott Morrison, has with Premier McGowan in Western Australia, and that beautiful announcement about the Swan River Bridge, and of course the additional funding that both the state government and the Morrison government are providing to ECU in relation to their campus and the relocation of the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts. We work with the McGowan government as a federal team to deliver for all Western Australians.
On the matter of COVID support, what can people expect from the government?
Well, again, look at where we were in March 2020 and look at where we are today. As a government, way back in March 2020 when COVID first hit, we knew that we had to act quickly. We knew that because of the closing of the borders, because of the closing down of parts of the economy, we had to put in place measures to ensure that employers were sustained, but also that employees were sustained. And of course, we put in that measure called Job Keeper. So that was to ensure that employers were able to keep that important employment relationship with their employees. We obviously also provided significant support via the increase in Job Seeker. But we also provided, as you know, other forms of support, and in particular to small businesses in Australia. And as you've said to me today, throughout COVID and the support even you were able to receive as a business, you were able to invest in additional equipment to ensure that you could keep going. But I think also, a fundamental difference between the Morrison government and the Labor Party is our attitude towards taxes. The Labor Party, what did they promise at the last federal election? An additional $387 billion in taxes. The only thing Labor know about taxes is how to put them up. What we do as a Liberal government, it's in our DNA, it's what we believe in, lowering taxes for all Australians. Whether you're a small business, you will pay less tax under us, or whether you're a tax-paying Australian, you will pay less tax under us. When Labor were last in office, the tax rate that small businesses paid was 30%. Under the Morrison Liberal government, we have reduced that by 5 percentage points. Small businesses now pay 25%. You look at personal income tax on around $90,000. Under our government, the Morrison Liberal government, if you weren't around $90,000, you are now getting around $2,500 more in your pocket as a result of our tax cuts. So on tax alone, Labor, they'll always raise it because that's what they know how to, that's all they know how to do. But with us as a Liberal government, lowering taxes for the benefit of Australians and Australian businesses, that's what we do.
To women's matters, because a lot of our viewers are women. On the issue of women's board, should all women of Australia are confident about that their views and their perspectives and their concerns will be addressed by this government, particularly given what happened in Canberra?
The answer to that question is yes. I'm really proud to be part of a government that when it comes to delivering policies that empower women, that is exactly what we have done. When you look at employment, for example, women's employment in Australia is now, or should I say unemployment, 3.8%. If you look at where employment was prior to COVID and where you look at where employment is now, we have more people in employment across Australia than we have ever had before. In excess of 13.3 million Australians are in work. Women's unemployment is at an all-time low. Under the Morrison government, we now have over 50%, it's around 52% of board positions in Australia are held by women. That's never happened before. If you want to talk about the courts and my appointments there, I am a big believer that you do need diversity, in particular in gender, in the courts in Australia. And I have been fortunate enough in my time as Attorney General to make around 38 appointments to the federal courts in Australia. Over 50% of those appointments have been women. I made it my mission to actively go out and seek the best women that I could find, and I found them.
When it comes to Women's Network logo, there has been extraordinary amount of media discussion and coverage on the matter. Does this show us that the federal government is out of touch with female voters?
Well, what I'd say to you is this, that actually had nothing to do with the federal government. And again, I stand by our record on delivering for women under the Morrison government, in particular when it comes to jobs for women, and from my own personal perspective, appointments to government boards, but in particular appointments to the courts within Australia. That was an entirely internal departmental decision, and I understand the logo has been taken down and the relevant department will now consult with the staff as to what any future logo will look like. But totally separate to government, that was an internal departmental issue.
Wait, what can young voters expect from the Morrison government in the upcoming federal election and the federal budget?
Jobs. When I'm out there talking to people, it doesn't matter what age group, it is all about jobs. And we had always said that we would be a government that put in place the right policies that would ensure that employers were able to prosper, grow and create more jobs for Australians. When we came into office, and I've got the figures here, it's a clear choice when you look at, for example, youth unemployment under Labor in September 2013 was 12.7%. Under the Morrison government, February 2022, it is 9.3%.
but there are some particularly difficult areas in Australia, such as Mandurah and other suburbs around other capital cities, have challenges on youth unemployment. Will there be specific plans in the federal budget to address this? Because 9%, it is a significant
It's coming
reduction.
down, but it's still too high, as we know. It's still too high. Look, it's a really, really good point to raise. So one thing, again, that we have well and truly delivered for all Australians, but it's including Western Australians.
What will you deliver?
Yep. And it's what I have delivered with the Morrison government, actually.
I think
and that is
the
highest number of people in apprenticeships ever in Australia. That is a good thing, because what's an apprenticeship? It is a job for life. What do employers want from their employees? They want you to be work ready from day one. So when I was the skills minister, I worked very closely with my counterparts at a state level, including obviously very closely with the Western Australian skills minister. And we were able to put in place the Job Trainer Fund. This was free or low-cost training in courses that were in labour market demand in particular states and territories across Australia. That is all about a government putting in place those policies that are going to ensure that you as a young person, you know where the jobs are, you're able to get that free or low-cost training, you're able to get into that apprenticeship, and you're able to get a job.
Michaelia Cash, thanks for joining us this week on Western.
It's always great to be with you, Ivan.
And now, here's AMA WA spokesman Dr Andrew Miller with his weekly COVID-19 update and commentary.
Hi, thanks for your time. In general terms, we're going very well in Western Australia with our hospitalisations and deaths from COVID compared to other states that saw similar numbers. And the reason for that is that we waited until we had very high third dose boosters. In fact, we probably hit about the sweet spot for those boosters to be working well in a large part of the vulnerable population. Disappointing that we're seeing hundreds of outbreaks within aged care facilities. The ventilation and the masking there is obviously not up to the task of keeping this very contagious variant out. And hopefully the high booster rates among a lot of that population will continue to see good outcomes there. For the general population, we need to be wearing very good masks, high quality masks wherever possible. Use an N95 or a KF94 mask, and seeing too many people walking around with them hanging off their nose or not thinking that it's important when this is a virus that still spreads like cigarette smoke does. So really important to have a very effective mask on if you're indoors around other people at the shops and so on. I'm tending to avoid crowded indoor places wherever possible. When I do go in there, I love the security of having a really tight fitting N95 mask on, knowing that all the air that I breathe is being sucked in through that filtration material. We've got a bit of a problem at the moment with the approvals process for molnupiravir, which is one of the antiviral drugs that can be used effectively in the population, particularly those who are vulnerable to complications, so the older population, and it's been approved by and listed on the National Prescribing Service as available to everybody, but in Western Australia they're restricting it to unvaccinated people, which seems to be a bit of a punishment for those who have been vaccinated, and that needs to stop, and we need to make access to it easy without all the red tape of the bureaucracy of needing permission of the state government to get something that the GPs well understand. So we need to get that piece of red tape sorted out. Other than that, at the moment, the state travelling better than anywhere else in the world at this stage of the pandemic. So thanks very much for your time.
And that's WP for this week. We'll be back again next time, but for now, it's back to you, Ivan and Melly.
Thanks, Nelson. And here is Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. Today on 6 News, breaking news, all the latest developments on the SA election, plus US President Joe Biden presses his Chinese counterpart on support for Moscow, and 3 years of unbiased news and uncensored views. 6 News celebrates our 3rd birthday. You can see full details on those stories and plenty more by heading to our YouTube channel. Just search 6 News Australia to find us, or head to our website, 6newsau.com. For now, though, guys, it's back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs, with the latest news on our website, wamnnews.com.au.
From Melly and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.